you got Pharisaism, you've got the Sadducees, and you got the Essenes. Now,
Yes.
I've read in some places that the Essenes tended to, of those three groups, tended to side on the deterministic ways of thinking. And the Essenes were more popular even in Nazareth and the surrounding area where Jesus was actually known in his teaching. And it's interesting, I read this too, that the Essenes, it said they kind of went silent for a while there, but it actually connects them to the formation of Gnosticism.
Yes.
And so, is there any? I don't know if you did much study on the Essenes, but it seems like that of all the lines of deterministic thinking, it would have been through that line of the Essenes, which, interestingly, in the historical, were the ones who, with their Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that, were found in their Qumran and the area that they oversee. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but I just wondered if you studied any of that far back in the history of it.
Now, aside from clear evidence that Dr. Flowers has not read the Book of Discipline or any of the other scrolls from Qumran, and really any of the original documentation of the Essene community, the literature that has been spawned by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is huge. And, of course, what that means is there are a lot of different takes. Obviously, in the immediate decades right after the discovery of the scrolls, you have people jumping to try to, get their place in the analysis of these things. And then as more of the scrolls would come out, then you'd have a little bit more idea. It's obvious that since this was a library, that it does not have a single, just one single, there's some astrological stuff in there and things like that. It doesn't have just one single perspective on everything. You can't just assume that, there are people who are not even sure that the Essenes and the Qumran community are coextensive. So there's lots of things to be discussed. But what it sounded like, what was being said there by Dr. Flowers, was some idea. It almost sounded to me like he was saying that the Essene community might have had something to do with the development of Gnosticism. Now, again, Gnosticism is not just one thing. That's why calling anything a Gnostic interpretation is just simply inaccurate. It's demonstrates you're probably not really familiar with what's going on. But there were wide varieties of understanding amongst Gnostics. And here's something that's important. One of the questions that immediately is raised is the Apostle Paul and the Apostle John both write against Gnostic concepts, or at least concepts that are found within the more fully formed Gnosticism of the 2nd century. So what was Paul warning the church of Colossae about? What is the nature of the denial of the physical body that is inherent in what 1 John is warning about? That the Antichrist is saying that he did not come in the flesh. Was that some of the bad assumptions have been that what he's writing against is full-blown, developed 2nd century Valentinian, Marcion type Gnosticism. And it's not. It's a mixture. What's clear, at least in Colossians, is that what he's responding against is a mixture of Judaism and early Gnostic, at least Easternized thought. And so maybe what Flowers is talking about here is, well, where would that have come from? Of course, there's next to zero possibility that the Qumran community would have had anything to do with a movement coming into Colossae in the 5th or 6th or 7th century, 6th or 7th decade of the 1st century. So I'm not aware of anyone who can meaningfully comment on the breadth of the influence of the specific teachings of the Qumran community. Anything there is pure speculation. But what's obvious is, what is the greatest influence in the Qumran community? Is this a difficult question to ask? What are they most known for? Well, things like the Isaiah scroll and the Leviticus scroll. Isaiah, oh, the prophet that has that whole section, word for word identical to the way it is today, about God's sovereignty over time, and tell me what's going to happen in the future, tell me what happened in the past and why it took place, and all this stuff. And so you sort of go, what might have influenced them to believe things like, all my days have been written in your book before they ever were, or you know my thoughts before I ever speak them, or maybe, yeah, it must be. Where would they have gotten that while they're writing scrolls of Isaiah? I don't know. So just as in so much of the rest of the stuff in what we're looking at here, the biblical foundation, the biblical influence is just ignored. It's just like, has to have been something else out there. Might have just been spending so much time with, the scriptures. Might have had something to do with all that. But anyway.
Oh, I did. I went all the way back to ancient Sumer in my thesis. So I spent quite a bit of time on the Qumran community because of that. And they believe that God controls the very breath rate, the heartbeat, everything. Every little minute thing is controlled by God in that Qumran community.
There's actually, if you look it up for yourself, if you look up various scholarly articles on the subject of compatibility, compatibilism, determinism, and free will, just put those in plus Qumran. Dozens of articles where it's not just a single, they just believed one thing, because they didn't. They recognize, as we recognize, because I believe in the exhaustive nature of God's decree. And so I believe what Ephesians 1:11 plainly teaches. And yet I believe that God is just to judge anyone based upon their actions fulfilling the desires of their hearts. So you can dismiss compatibilism, you can mock it if you want, but none of you will ever be able to consistently interpret key passages of Scripture as long as you do so. And listening to you doing handstands trying to get around Genesis 50 and Isaiah 10 and Acts 4, and confessing that you have to use a different form of hermeneutics to deal with them than you have to deal with anything else, is one of the reasons why we don't find your argumentation overly effective.
And guess who influenced them?
Who's that?
Stoicism.
Stoicism.
There's a very definite connection with Stoicism, and the only other Jewish person who we know that dealt more with a deterministic fashion was Philo of Alexandria. Guess where he was influenced? From Stoicism.
So, Stoic determinism and the sovereignty of God found in the book of Isaiah are not the same things by any stretch of the imagination. Anyone who thinks they are is trying to create connections that are not there. They're not fair. They're not being balanced. I mean, and, in this group of people now, all you have to do is say, that's Stoicism. So did Proverbs come up with so much of what it says from Stoicism? Because there are major portions of the Proverbs and material in the Psalter that are perfectly consistent with Stoic philosophy. Why? Because Stoicism, by God's common grace, says a lot of very true things. So unless you buy into the history of religions garbage, where all all religions just simply are patchwork quilts of all other religions, then you have to recognize that in certain areas, such as in the expression of wisdom, you're going to find similarities across religious bounds. And Stoicism especially was exactly right when it encouraged self-discipline, self-control, and long-term thinking in its adherents. But its view of the world did not have a personal God who was accomplishing his own self-glorification. And so whatever you can keep flattening out determinism all you want into just something that isn't meaningful, which is what you've got to do. But honest people are going to look at what Stoicism believed and what Reformed people believe and go, that's not the same thing when it comes to the issue of the nature of God's sovereign decree by any stretch of the imagination. Now, people who don't want to get into all that, they just want to have a bat to throw at Calvinists so you don't have to actually deal with the exegesis. That's, that